Hello, all. Welcome to today's lecture on food chain and food web. Now, food chain is a pathway that outlines who eats whom in an ecosystem. It is the it shows the flow of energy and nutrients, the transfer of energy and nutrients through a series of organisms in an ecosystem with the repeated process of eating and being eaten. What that means to say is, if you see here, the first organism is acting as food for the second organism, that is the fish. But then that fish is also acting as food for the next organism. It doesn't stop over there. That is acting as food for the next organism. So every organism is not only eating its food, at some point of time, it is also being eaten. This transfer of energy through this process, when there is transfer of energy and nutrients, that is called as a food chain. Now, a food chain has several stages or several levels that we call as the trophic level. So, there are different types of trophic levels, but in general, trophic level is a stage in a food chain where the energy exchange takes place. Or you can say that all the organisms which are having a similar mode of feeding or which are getting their food by an identical number of steps are put in one level, put in one stage, and that is what we call as the trophic level. Now, if you see here, I have marked the trophic levels of every step in a rectangular box. So we have the first trophic level, the second, the third, and so on. The trophic levels are called by certain names. Usually they are given certain terminologies, and that is what I have put in the box below. That is in the rectangular boxes below. I have also shown some pink colored flags where I have given you an example of a food chain. But food chains are umpteen in nature. So you can write any of your examples. Here I have just shown you one type or one example of a food chain. So the first trophic level, usually in every food chain, there are a few exceptions to this which we will look at in a bit, but usually the first trophic level is constituted by the producers. Now producers are organisms which are deriving their energy by photosynthesis. So what they do is they trap the energy of the sun and convert it or fix it into chemical energy in the form of food in their bodies. This is usually represented by green plants like grass or trees or shrubs or herbs. It could also be phytoplanktons in the case of aquatic ecosystem. So we have producers which normally form the first trophic level. Now when these producers are consumed or they are eaten up by organisms, by animals, those are called as the primary consumers. Primary consumers, in other words, can be called as the herbivores. So primary consumers, examples could be the caterpillar. In an aquatic ecosystem, it could be a zooplankton. So any organism which is deriving its energy by feeding on plants is what we call as a primary consumer. Now, these primary consumers are eaten up by carnivores or secondary consumers, which are shown in the yellow box. An example here is sparrow. Insects are also an example of secondary consumers. So, secondary consumers are feeding upon the primary consumers. They are deriving their energy from the primary consumers. In some food chains and some ecosystems, it stops over here. In other cases, there could be another two or three levels of secondary consumers. So I could, like you saw in the previous video, I could have a fish eating another fish. I could have another fish, a bigger fish eating the second one. So we could have multiple levels of secondary consumers, or the food chain might end here as shown here in the yellow box, or in some cases, or you can say in many of the ecosystems, I ultimately have an apex predator which is forming the fourth trophic level. So it does not mean to say that every food chain ends with four stages. I could have seven, I could have five, I could have three. It depends from, or it varies from one ecosystem to the other. But usually in a food chain, in an ecosystem, the species or the animal which is at the top of the food chain and it does not have any predators of its own, it does not have any organism that comes and eats it up, such a species is called as an apex predator or a top consumer. So the apex predator will not have any predators of its own. For example, it could be a lion, a tiger in a forest, or a wolf, shark in case of an aquatic ecosystem. In a pond, it could be an alligator. So these animals don't have any natural predators of their own except for human beings who could kill them for one purpose or the other. But otherwise, such animals are termed as the apex predator. So in this example, I have shown you the hawk. Now, these are the different stages of the food chain which have been given levels, which have been given numbers as 1, 2, 3, 4. So I have grass being eaten by caterpillar, caterpillar is being eaten by sparrow, sparrow is being eaten by hawk. These are the four trophic levels or four trophic stages. Now, we also have another stage, which is the decomposers or the detritivores, which are shown in the gray box below. Now, this includes scavengers like vultures or which are eating the dead animals, or it could involve detritivores, could involve the earthworms and other worms which are found in the soil. Decomposers includes all the microorganisms which are breaking down, like the bacteria, the fungi, the actinomycetes. So, all of these organisms are involved, they are a part of every stage. They can eat the producers, as the arrows are shown here. They can eat the primary consumers, they may eat the secondary consumer, the tertiary consumer, the predators, the apex predators. They feed on every organism. That is, they are involved at every stage of the trophic level, at every stage of the food chain. That is the reason they have not been given any particular number, because they could come after the first level, they could come after the second level. They are present, they are, you can say that they are the link for the entire food chain. They are the ones which bring back the nutrients into the soil. So that is the reason the organisms that are comprising the detritivores and the decomposers have not been given any stage, they have not been numbered any trophic level, but they are an integral part of every food chain. So these food chains are of different types. There are three main types of food chains, namely the grazing food chain, the parasitic food chain, and the detritus food chain. Let us see what each one of these is, and let's study that with an example. So the grazing food chain is also called as the predator food chain, what I just showed you in the previous slide. That is, it starts with an autotroph, that starts with a producer, usually the plants, and it ends with a predator. Simple. I have producers, they are eaten up by herbivores, they are eaten up by carnivores, primary carnivores. I have the primary consumers, the secondary consumers. So this goes on, the herbivore, carnivore, top predator. It's the basic, most easy type of food chain that you will find in the ecosystem. That is the grazing food chain. An example being, I have a tree on which there lives a caterpillar. So caterpillar is feeding on the leaves of the tree. The caterpillar is being eaten up by a small bird, maybe a sparrow. That sparrow is eaten up by a snake, and the snake is being eaten up by a hawk. So hawk here is the apex predator, and this is an example of a grazing food chain or a predatory food chain. What are the key features here? It starts with a producer and it ends with a predator. The second type of food chain is a parasitic food chain. Parasitic food chain is wherein the food chain starts with a large organism and it proceeds to a smaller organism. That is the first feature. It starts with a big animal or a plant and it proceeds. As you see the food chain proceeding, you'll see that the size of the organism keeps on decreasing. The second feature is that there is no outright killing of the host. There is no outright killing of the animal or the plant like you see in predatory food chain. See, what happens here is the snake eats up the bird. But in case of a parasitic food chain, it doesn't directly kill it. It may ultimately lead to its death. But there is no outright killing and it always ends with a parasite. In the first one, it was always ending with a predator. Here it is ending with a parasite. That is why it is called as a parasitic food chain. An example is, a simplest example that I could give you is a human being which is acting as the host is being fed upon, is being, there are organisms living on it like parasites, like tapeworms or fleas are living on it and absorbing the nutrition. So the human is not killed immediately. Yes, over a period of time, if the infection is not treated, the human does die. But that is a very simple example of a parasitic food chain. Another one that is shown over here is, I have a tree. The tree has fruits. There are bats or birds which are eating those fruits. Those birds are having ticks on their bodies and the ticks are being eaten up by fungi. So this is a very simple example of a parasitic food chain. As you see, from such a big sized tree, we are finally reaching the fungus which is having a much smaller size. So the size of the organism keeps on decreasing. The third one is detritus food chain. In some literature, you will also find it as saprophytic food chain. Here, we start with dead and decaying organic matter. So here we do not have a producer, very unconventional food chain, because we don't start with a producer like in the other food chains. Here we start with the dead and decaying matter, dead organic matter. And this dead organic matter is being eaten up by detritivores and by the decomposers. That is why this food chain is called as a detritus food chain. So you can see here I have given you two examples. The first one is where dead leaf litter, which is on the ground, is being fed upon by wood louse. The plural is wood lice. That is being eaten up by spiders, which is acting as food for the sparrows, which is acting as food for the snake, which is being eaten up by the hawk. So the second part, the latter part, looks like a predatory food chain, but we started with dead and decaying organic matter. That is why this is an example of a detritus food chain. See the second example, I again have dead leaf litter. So the dead leaf litter is going to being fed upon by the bacteria. So the bacteria is acting as a decomposer here. Bacteria breaks down the dead leaf litter and returns the nutrients into the soil. It returns the basic nutrients into the soil. These nutrients are being fed upon by the earthworms, which are an example of detritivores, and that is being eaten by birds and so on. So here you can see in one of these, we have a detritivore directly getting involved, which is the wood lice that is feeding on the rotting matter. In the second example, we have a decomposer and a detritivore, that is an earthworm. So these are examples of detritus food chain where we begin with dead and decaying organic matter and it proceeds with the help of decomposers and detritivores. So these are the three types of food chain. That is the grazing food chain, which starts with a producer and ends with a predator. The parasitic food chain, doesn't matter what we start with, but ultimately we are going to end with a parasite. And the third type is the detritus food chain. We start with the dead and decaying organic matter over here. These are the three types of food chains. Now, in an ecosystem, we cannot have an isolated food chain running. It's not going to thrive. It's not going to be feasible for that ecosystem. So, every ecosystem will have interconnected and overlapping food chains, or we'll have multiple food chains which are overlapping with each other, which are connecting with each other. And this is called as a food web. So, all of the cumulative, all food chains in an ecosystem together is what we call as a food web. You can see it right over here. The plant is being fed upon by the goat, it is being fed upon by the rabbit. Both rabbit and the goat can be eaten by the jackal, or the rabbit can be eaten by a wild cat. So there are different animals coming into play over here. They're all interconnected, some of them are overlapping. This is what you call as a food web. Now, I'll just show you some examples before we get into the significance of food chains. This here, what is shown is a fish that is caught by a heron, and this picture has been taken from Florida. As you can see, the fish is having another fish in its mouth. So these secondary consumers, they are consuming another fish, that is a secondary consumer. But then again, the secondary consumers are preying on other organisms, and those organisms are initially getting their foods from plants, which are the producers of the ecosystem. So I have producers being eaten up by herbivores, and herbivores are being eaten by carnivores, which are ultimately being eaten up by the top predator. So this is a very good example to show you how one organism which is eating is also being eaten, the fish in the middle. The second example, the second picture I wanted to bring your attention to is to show you how the Caribbean reef shark is swimming near a healthy coral in the Arabian Sea, in the Caribbean Sea. Now, these sharks are the apex predators of that ecosystem. So, they can eat any other consumer. They may be at the fourth trophic level, they may be at the fifth trophic level, but they are the final predators. They don't have any natural enemies of their own. As you can see here, the first one, we have a sea eagle which is snatching an epaulette shark from the water. From it, this is taken from Australia, in the Kimberley region of Australia. As you can see here, the shark is snatching the organism from the water. So the shark is an apex predator, and it is part of both the ecosystems, both marine ecosystem, because it is able to pick up the shark from the water, and it is also going to act as a predator in terrestrial food web. So it is having not only fish as its food, it can also hunt on snakes, on crabs, on land they can hunt on mice, opossum, on other smaller birds. So it is acting as a predator, or it is a part of two ecosystems, both the marine as well as the terrestrial ecosystem. This fourth picture is taken of the various fungal decomposers. These pictures have been shot in various parts of India. So as you can see here, we have the fungi growing on wood, and they are decomposing the wood. They are making sure that the wood is being completely broken down. So these are classical examples. Fungi are classical examples of the decomposers that are forming a link in every food chain. Now, these food chains and food web are very important because they help us to understand the feeding relationship between organisms in an ecosystem, who is eating whom, who is acting as food, who is acting as a top predator, that kind of feeding relationship or the nutrition how each organism is obtaining can be understood if we study the food chain and food web in an ecosystem. Another example of the significance, the mighty significance of food web is that the food web is helping to maintain stability of the living community. That is because it provides alternate pathways. These are, if one particular organism is dead or one particular population is completely nullified, it does not mean that its predator has to go hungry. No, the predator gets an alternate pathway, so it ensures that every trophic level gets food. That is a very important part of a food web. A food web is ensuring that every trophical level has different choices, it has different um, parts where it can play, it can have different predators, it can have different types of food, so that no trophic level dies out, no trophic level goes without food. That is a very important part of, or that's a very important significance of the food web. Now, these food chains and food webs can be shown diagrammatically as an ecological pyramid. So, ecological pyramid is basically a diagrammatic representation which shows the relationship between organisms in a food chain within an ecosystem. That relationship could be the relationship of number, it could be of biomass, or it could be of the energy. But some kind of relationship, if I want to show between the organisms of a food chain, that can be shown in a very simple manner, in a graphical manner, in the form of ecological pyramid. So these ecological pyramids are also called as Eltonian pyramid because they were developed by Charles Elton. And there are three major types of ecological pyramids. We have the pyramid of numbers, the pyramid of biomass, and the pyramid of energy. Pyramid of numbers shows us the, or tells us the relationship between the number of organisms. It is based on the number of organisms at every trophic level. It does not consider the size, or it does not consider how much energy they are getting, just the numbers. So based on the numbers, we have the pyramid of numbers. Based on the number of organisms at every level, we have the pyramid of numbers which can be plotted. Usually in a very regular scenario, the numbers keep decreasing as we go up one trophic level to the other, but we can have it the other way around as well. I'll show you about that. The second one is pyramid of biomass, which is plotting or which is showing the total amount of organic matter or the weight of the organism at every trophic level at a given time per unit area. So, pyramid of biomass shows us the total amount of organic matter. When I say organic matter, it is the weight. Inside me, there's a lot of organic molecules. So, my total weight is the biomass. Now, it shows the biomass at a given time and per unit area. I cannot say that the biomass of all elephants is can be taken as one level. That cannot be possible. In a particular area, say a particular forest, at the particular time, say this time of the day, how much is the weight of the elephants. That is why we are specifying that the pyramid of biomass shows the total amount of organic matter at a given time and per unit area. We have the third one, which is the pyramid of energy, that shows the relationship of energy accumulation at different trophic levels. So each of these pyramids could be either upright or it could be inverted. Pyramid of numbers can be upright or inverted. We look at what the upright means. Upright pyramid is where I have the base of the pyramid bigger than the tip of the pyramid. Whereas inverted is the other way around. The base of the pyramid is very small, whereas the top of the pyramid is quite wide. So the pyramid of numbers and pyramid of biomass can be either upright or inverted, whereas the pyramid of energy is always upright. We look at the reason why. So the first one is pyramid of numbers. Now, pyramid of numbers, I told you, can be either upright or inverted. When it is upright, an example of that is what you, or most of the food chains show us an upright pyramid of numbers. The reason being, the bottommost part, the base of the pyramid is quite wide. That is, number of the producers is much more. And as we keep going up, as we go on to the second trophic level, the third trophic level, the herbivores, the carnivores, the top predators, the number keeps decreasing. So the numbers keep decreasing as we go higher up the trophic level because of energy losses. We have already spoken about the 10% energy rule. So because of that, the number of organisms keeps on decreasing. An example shown here is the number of grasshoppers in a cropland is lesser than the number of crops. Has to be. If my grasshoppers are more than the number of crops, I'll have no crops over there. The grasshoppers will eat everything. So the grasshopper number is lesser than that of the cropland. The number of frogs which eat the grasshoppers is lesser than that of the grasshopper, and so on. Number of snakes is lesser than the number of frogs. So as we go up the trophic level, the number of the organism keeps on decreasing. The reason being, the energy losses occur at every level, so I'll have more and more organisms to be eaten to get that particular energy. This is the reason pyramid of numbers is always, most of the times, upright. That is, the base of the pyramid is higher, and as we go up the trophic level, the pyramid keeps on narrowing in size. I can also have an inverted pyramid of numbers. This is seen when there is the number of consumers are greater than the number of producers. This is typically seen in a parasitic food chain. So you can see over here, I may have one tree, and on that tree there may be many birds that are living. Those birds, each bird will have a number of lice on it, and each lice is going to harbor several bacteria. So when the number of consumers is greater than the number of producers, that is when we see a parasitic food, or example, a parasitic food chain. That is when we see an inverted pyramid of numbers, where the base of the pyramid is small because the number of that producer is small, and as we go up the food chain, or as we move up the trophic levels, the number keeps on increasing, due to which we get an inverted pyramid of numbers. The second one is pyramid of biomass. This also can be either upright or inverted. The upright pyramid of biomass is again what is seen usually. Say the total weight of the crops that you find in a field will be much more than the total weight of the insects that are feeding on it. And those insects will weigh much more than the few birds that are feeding on it. So in a food chain, the pyramid of biomass can be upright when the total mass of the producers is greater than the total mass of the animals that are eating it. So this is an upright pyramid of biomass. We can also have on the right side, what you see is the inverted pyramid of biomass. Now this is usually seen in an aquatic ecosystem. The reason being, the aquatic ecosystem has phytoplanktons as the major producers. So phytoplanktons are basically microorganisms, and you can see that their mass will be very small. They are microorganisms, they are microscopic. So their mass, their weight is much lesser than that of the animals that are feeding on it. So the phytoplanktons are forming the base of the pyramid here, and the base of the pyramid is very narrow. The next level is the insects. Insects are having more weight than the phytoplanktons on which they are feeding. The insects are being eaten by small fishes, which are having more mass or more weight than the insects that they eat or they feed upon. And then they are being eaten by huge fishes, say a whale or a shark, which has much higher biomass than compared to its feed, or than compared to the organisms which it is feeding upon. So in an aquatic ecosystem, usually the pyramid of biomass is inverted, mainly because we start with phytoplanktons, which are very tiny and which are having negligible mass. The third one is the pyramid of energy. This is what shows you the energy accumulation at different trophic levels. So I told you the pyramid of energy can be only upright. The reason being, the energy flow is unidirectional, as we have discussed earlier, and there is loss of energy at every trophic level. At successive trophic levels, there is energy being lost. So the amount of food energy that is entering each level is less than the amount that was entering the level below. At every level, there is loss of energy. So that is the reason maximum energy storage is at the base, that is with the producers. The example here is crops. When the crops are being eaten by the grasshopper, there is loss of energy. Only 10% is being transferred through. That is the reason the grasshoppers have lesser energy. Grasshoppers are being eaten by frogs. So then frogs are having lesser energy, because at every level there is loss of energy and there is successive loss, which means to say the previous level had more energy than the next level. That is the reason pyramid of energy is always upright. Pyramid of energy cannot be inverted, because I can never have more energy with the predators and less energy at the producer level. That's never going to happen. As the organism is being eaten, automatically there is loss of energy happening over there. If you remember the 10% energy rule. So, with that, we have looked at what are the food chains and food webs and how we can represent them in the form of an ecological pyramid or a food pyramid. These food pyramids can be either upright or inverted in the case of pyramid of numbers and pyramid of biomass. However, pyramid of energy can be only upright due to the 10% energy rule. So I hope you all have followed my class today. I hope to see you with the next lecture. Thank you.